And you could have, say, one channel playing in reverse, or so the patch I have to show you today is called Twin Paradox, which is the name of a thought experiment in general relativity where twins travel at different speeds and therefore age differently. The idea behind it is a sort of primitive form of time stretching. I've played with time stretching before in some other patches like Tiny Orchestra and Deep Time. This is most like Transmogrifier, if you've ever played with that patch, which has sort of a time compression expansion thing going on. The way that it works is that the playback position of a looper is controlled by, or the start position of a looper is controlled by a very slow moving LFO, or can be a fast moving LFO. But the LFO determines where the start position is, and then the looper's start is constantly re-triggered by a really fast clock divider. So it produces something that is very granular, I would say, in nature, very lo-fi. This is sort of me coming up against kind of the limits of what sort of processing options are available in ZOIA. If you really want sophisticated time stretching, you're going to have to look to software, really. There aren't a lot of hardware options that I think do time stretching particularly well. But I'm just going to sort of record something and show you what it can do. So I've got just a little sample player on my phone I've used in some other demos recently. It's got a harp sample going on. And this is set up in such a way, I originally designed it on Zebu, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things you can do in Zebu with the patch. But you can use these buttons at the top to record, or you can use the left and right stomp switches. There are two channels, so you can record two sets of time stretching shenanigans, which will come into play in a minute when I show off the delay mode, which is very weird and experimental. All of this is a little weird and experimental, but let's see what happens. So first I'm going to record something. And we can hear that jaggedness. We can change the resolution of the playback. The higher the resolution, the more aliasing effects come into play. We actually have a multiplier to really push this. So it gets very lo-fi. I'm wondering if I should push this up. Just pushing the gain on my audio interface a little bit. And if we take the resolution down more, we end up with something very granular in nature. But that's not where the interesting stuff happens. We can change the pitch without affecting the speed. But we can also do time dilation. So this is at half speed. We can take it much slower. We can also go faster. We can also control the time dilation by an external tempo, whether it's tap tempo, CV tempo, or MIDI clock. By pressing this button here above, this is a tap tempo button if you're using it on Zebu and want tap tempo, but also the right stomp switch works for that. So when you turn on the external tempo, it'll try and match that tempo. And then you can still control the dilation. So that was pretty fast, but I'll slow it down to half speed. Still pretty fast. So we have some additional effects. There's all these effects have a resolution control, which is basically like a rate control. It's how often they come into play, essentially how often they're refreshed to see what happens. The first is called Jitter, and we have a probability control for it and a range control for Jitter. But Jitter is essentially a control that allows you to randomly, within the range described, move the playhead around in space. So it's sort of like a CD skip where, you know, it'll go backward or forward a little bit in time. I'll just turn it on. Let's turn. With speech or drums, which I think are good sort of material to use with this patch, Jitter can do some really interesting things. We also have a random panning option, and we can control the spread to introduce that. So it'll just pan around the stereo field. And we have an interval change, which is controlled by a mixer down here that sets the probability. There's a no change, and then we have two intervals that we can define to whatever we want. Right now they're down 1 octave and up 1/5. So this is the resolution, the sort of rate of change. I'm going to turn that up a little bit, and then I'll introduce. We get these sort of glitchy changes in pitch. When it's set at its lowest resolution, the pitch change will affect each cycle of the loop. So that's just a way to introduce some mayhem into something, add glitchy textures. Again, this is not like a smooth time stretching algorithm. So I thought maybe move into the granular glitchy stuff, explore that terrain a little bit. You can also change the playback direction. I should have pointed this out long ago. It's one of the more interesting features. So we can play forward and reverse. I talked about resolution. So the only things left are, hold on, I'm going to record silence for a second. Oh, goodness. Yeah, sometimes it holds on to something that's in its buffer. It's a little weird. There are weird things that can happen in recording. I will say that for the best results, you want to have the time, dilation, and pitch zeroed out. They can be in other positions and it'll record stuff. It just functions the most consistently. But again, if you're looking for something glitchy, play around. And we'll see that effect in just a minute when I talk about the delay mode. We have 3 different recording modes. We were in manual record, which just means I press the button, I press the stomp switch, it records in time with my presses. The second one is a clocked record, and this uses the external clock coming in to sort of time how long recording occurs. So recording will begin at the next clock cycle that's received, and it'll end at the clock cycle after that. Which again, if you're trying to record something in time with what you're doing and then time stretch it afterwards, could be an interesting way to approach the patch. But then we have this delay mode, and I will say delay mode is weird. I don't know how else to put it. Delay mode is weird. So you have these 2 halves, and they can be set independently in delay mode or in any mode. You can, have different pitch and time dilation effects on either side of the equation. We have a tap tempo that controls the speed of the delay. Then we have this control down here for feedback. I originally was going to disable this when it wasn't in delay mode, but it's not disabled so that you can feed audio from one side or channel into the other if you want. So basically this just takes the output of the 2 loopers and feeds them back into one another. And since they alternate in playback, we get this sort of delay effect. Some other real quick things, we have a dry level control down here, and then we have a control for each of the loops levels for mixing purposes. But we have this feedback control. Let me see what this is set at. I probably have it set at default because I'm boring. So what I'm going to do is change the time dilation on one of these to speed it up, and the other one to slow it down. And I will say that this delay is, you'll see very shortly. It's not it's definitely an experimental mode of this patch. But let's just sort of hear what that sounds like. So I'm just going to play a single note. And we see the resolution is not good, because each time it bounces from one head to the other, it's sort of being chopped up more and more and more and more. But we can do some really interesting stuff with this. We can do sort of classic weird pitch delays. This is going to get loud, or not loud, but high pitch. There's no filtering on this, so keep that in mind. If if you have some way to filter it post, that might be useful. I didn't really have the CPU to add that in. And again, this mode is pretty experimental, but we're going to get ascending pitches now. And we could have, say, descending pitches on this channel. So and you could have, say, one channel playing in reverse, or really slow this down. Slow both of them down. And you could add jitter and do some weird stuff. Let's add some pitch shifting in. So like I said, weird experimental delay. But if you're into weird experimental delays, it's pretty great. And that's pretty much time or twin paradox. Like I said, it's sort of glitchy, it's lo-fi, it's not very high resolution at all, but that said, you can do some interesting experimental, granular, glitchy things with it. It has these nice options to match things to pitch, and I'm gonna just start by, or I'm just gonna spend a second recording some drum sounds into it, so you can hear how that works. Let's clear these buffers. So I'm just gonna, again, I've got a drum sound on this app that I use for playing around with stuff in development. So I've got the jitter going on. And we can hear the playback sort of jump around sometimes. Oh, I forgot to talk about the stuff that I said I was going to talk about later. So let's talk about that. So at the bottom, again, we have, if you load this into Zebu, you'll have 4 CV inputs and 2 CV outputs. The 2 CV outputs, if you watch these lights up here, they sort of show the speed of the LFOs that are scrubbing the buffer. And those are outputted on the 2 CV outputs. On the inputs, we have attenuators for time dilation, pitch, and then, I'm sorry, there's a third one here that we don't have an attenuator for that'll just change the playback direction of the loops, whatever they're in, when it receives a gate or trigger. But if you're using this with ZOIA, you also have access to these things because I routed the expression CV input to these attenuverters. So you can use a expression pedal to control pitch or time or both, time dilation, pitch or both. And then you have these buttons above. When you press them the first time, it will only direct that control to this side. When it's blue, it'll only direct things to this side, and when it's white, it'll be directed to both of them. So you can sort of set up, you could have, if you're using this with ZOIA, an expression pedal that changes the time dilation on one and the pitch on the other. You could do some real weird stuff playing them together. But with Zebu, again, you could control both of these destinations at the same time, or just one or the other. So, it's sort of, Zebu should have more CV inputs, just should. It doesn't though, so this was sort of my way to compromise and create some flexibility with the CV inputs that are in the patch to give some more options. But yeah, that's Twin Paradox. I'm just gonna, play around a little bit. One thing it doesn't have is a reverb, so I've got a reverb set up next to it. This is a Mercury X that I just got, humble brag. I don't really like talking about like a lot of the other gear I have, but I'm going to use this, so you should know what it is. Which is an interesting reverb. I'm not positive how I feel about it yet, but reverb can help this sort of thing to give it more atmosphere, right? When you're playing around with kind of glitchy time stretch stuff. So that's what we're going to do. And have a good time. I hope you enjoy the patch if you check it out. And that's all I got right now. Have a good day. If you like the patch, please take a moment to like it on Patch Storage. I appreciate it. It's nice to see that sort of, positive feedback. So again, hope you have a nice day. I'm rambling a bunch. Yeah, okay. Let's listen to some more weird stuff. Now with reverb.